Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf instruction podcast that helps you take control of your game. Now, here's your host, the founder of Par Breakers Golf Academy and certified Golf Channel Swing Fix instructor, Bernard Sheridan.
So, Kelly, welcome to Breaking Par. Thanks so much for being with us today.
I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, Bernard. Thank you.
So, Kelly, what is the project? So, for the audience, I let them in a little bit on that. That you're a golf course architect and that you've been around for quite a while now, and I know some and have played some of the designs that you've done here in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. I've always been a huge fan of your style, and I love a lot of the things that you do on in creating your layouts. So what are you doing right now?
Well, right now, Bernard, I've been working on some renovation projects in the Pennsylvania area, and have a new design in Old Bridge, New Jersey, that we've been working on for a number of years. I actually did the layout probably back in 2006 and have been going through various stages of seeking funding, and obviously it's part of a township governmental program. So that there's been changes in mayors and such over the years, and now there seems to be a real interest in reviving the project and possibly getting the full 18-hole golf course under construction in a few years. But presently, we're designing the practice facility that will be a part of the overall 18-hole layout. So we're in the process of doing that, kind of putting together some ballpark figures for budgeting purposes, and hopefully we'll have that under construction next year.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tell us a little bit about, I have a lot of students who are very interested in understanding some of the things that go on with greens and really what goes into the process of when you're designing a green, and really how do you come upon choosing the slope for the green and the overall, and I have a lot of other questions about that, but I know that a lot of the courses that I've played, you like to have pretty generous sized greens, but then they're also kind of strategically laid out so that it's almost like 2 or 3 greens in one green, at least the ones that I've seen that you've done.
Right. Yeah, I would say the greens that I've probably been the most pleased with have been the ones that we did for Letter Rock Golf Club out near Harleysville. And, the design process is can sometimes kind of be a mysterious thing because you're not quite sure how you came up with what you did. I mean, when I return to golf courses that we've done in the past and play the course, get on the green, I sometimes look at the green and think, wow, I'm surprised that I did something like this. I don't quite remember how we arrived at this, but really like what we did here. So I think there is a little bit of mystery in the design process, and it's not something you really want to go back and try to recapture when you're doing something new. I think you kind of, once you get plugged into the process, then you're kind of looking forward. You're not looking back. But a lot of times I do like to sketch out the green on paper, just in a very crude drafting type way, and kind of work with the if there's going to be bunkering on the green, work with the positioning of the bunkering, and then how those slopes on the putting surfaces might work with that bunkering, and then also look at how the slopes work around the green, because a lot of players in the golf world aren't flying the ball into the pin area. They're not spinning the ball back and trying to nestle the ball close to the pin. A lot of times it's on the ground rolling to the green, or it's rolling off to the left and to the right, and then they have a short pitch or a chip shot onto the green. So we also got to look at that total area surrounding the green and how it is shaped and maybe can support the ball rolling along the ground and onto the green. And conversely, ways to kind of protect pin areas is how you shape the ground so that the ball rolls away from that pin area if they don't quite hit the right shot. and then also really am probably more and more focused now on trying to create short grass, as much short grass around the greens, again to add to some diversity in how you play that recovery shot onto the green. But I think it makes it a little easier for the high handicap player if they have the choice of taking the putter out, and just hitting it along the fairway and putting it up to that pin area. If their short game, chipping or pitching game's not quite up to par, then that might be a good alternative for them. I know it is for me, not getting to play as much now. My short game is just not what it used to be, so it's nice to be able to take that putter out and try to hit it up to the hole, as opposed to always being in tall grass, having the ball buried in there, and then trying to hack it out of tall rough.
Sure. So I mean, so basically, you're using now, and it seemed like I said, at Letter Rock, I've been there many times, and that's more of almost like when you look at it, a traditional links layout. Even though it's not by the ocean, it's landlocked, but it has that overall feel, and there's not a lot of high rough around the greens. It's more where you can bounce it up there or hit it with your putter. So is that what you're finding, that style? Are you using that style more often than not, just for the fact that it's going to help, as you mentioned, those higher handicap players have better options to be able to not have to just fly everything in there?
Yes, I think that is definitely the style that I've kind of settled on, and design and your ideas evolve over time. I think there's things that you discard as you move on. There's things that but there's things that you realize more and more are truthful. They're the right way to design. They're the right way to challenge golfers, and I think that's definitely an important component in the design of a green. Is that, again, that ability to be able to have choices around a green, to pitch or chip into a pin area, and then the way that ground moves and how that ground moves to either help you get the ball into a pin area, maybe avoid a bunker, but still catch a slope and work the ball around that bunker into that pin area. And then, as I said, conversely, if you don't, quite hit the right kind of shot, or even hit a poor shot, maybe that slope carries you away, and you might still be on the green. I think that's one of the debates sometimes you have, is that golfers, when they hit a green, they feel like that they've, that they should be rewarded. I'm on the green, and yet they face that slope that can guide the good shot into the pin area, but now they have to face that slope that they're on the other side of that slope because they didn't hit a very good shot. Now they have to take that putt up and over the slope and judge how the ball is going to then roll out toward the hole, and they almost feel punished. But I think that's a good strategy. Again, they have the putter in their hand, which is much better than having the sand iron or being in tall rough. But they've got a bit more of a challenge because they didn't quite hit the right shot. But I think it's still, a legitimate way to design a green, where if you do end up with a long putt, like you said, some of the greens are fairly large, but if you do end up with a long putt, you should be required to do something a little bit more special because you didn't quite hit the right shot.
Sure. Now, how do you arrive on the actual degree of slope and, for the greens? And is the degree of slope on the greens consistent throughout the golf course, or is there sometimes drastic changes? I know that I've been told, at least, or I've heard, that overall the bulk of the slope on most of the greens that most architects do on a golf course are fairly similar. So in other words, let's say they have they create a golf course and then they, on all 18 greens, the average slope is, let's say, 2 degrees. Whereas, is there any time that average slope is not average, that it's just whatever the topography says for that hole, that's how you're choosing your slope? Give us a little bit of insight on that.
I think that in general, whether you're finding the slope on the ground and working with the natural features, and I think there are, some architects like Tom Doak and Corin Crenshaw and Gil Hance who, they get very nice sites. They get very good sites. And I think a lot of times, at least what, we're being told, is that they're finding their green sites and they're working with the existing slopes that are there. I think that there are, other architects where you're not quite getting the choice pieces of land and you're having to build your green sites. Either way, I think that you're still kind of working within the confines of certain slopes. With bent grass, I would say for the most part in a pinnable area, you're not going to want to exceed more than about 3 to 4%. And again, that depends on how big that area is and what the shot is like coming into it. But for the most part, I would say that's a limit that you want to kind of adhere to if you're wanting to check on the slope of a pin area. That's kind of what's in the back of your mind. If someone's telling you, well, we're hitting about 5-6%, well, you know that probably will never be pinnable. However, when you have 1%, 2%, 3% slopes, and you have a properly sized pin area, you can exceed that in between those pin areas.
Sure.
You may have 8, 9, 10, 11% slopes that kind of work in between those softer areas. And but still, again, that you have to think about the fact that if it hits a peak on a ridge and then it's coming down an 8% slope, you can't just have 10 feet there of 2% slope and expect the ball is gonna stay. So you got to start looking at the length of that pin area as it's coming off of a steeper slope, and then maybe even how that ground begins to maybe turn up a little bit or angle in such a way that it can kind of slow the ball as it comes into that pin area. But no, there's definitely guidelines that you have in the back of your mind, and when you're out there building and working with the shaper, you're constantly checking those slopes just to make sure that you're within the range. And then a lot of it's kind of judgment call and feel in the field. I can't say that every green I build has been 100% perfect. I mean, we have gone in a couple areas and softened some pin areas or expanded some pin areas. I know over the 31 years, I know of 2 greens where we've had to add some pin area because we didn't quite get it right. I think we tried to push the envelope a little bit. We tried to push the limit in terms of making that pin area really challenging, and didn't quite get it right. It was a little too difficult.
Well, isn't it a lot of, once you're out there and you're doing it, a lot of trial and error of working with each green that you're doing and testing it? And then, I mean, I know that in your mind you have a specific thing that you want to do. Let's say green shape, general slope, and I know that we spoke about Letter Rock, and I think the greens there are awesome. That's the whole reason why I love that golf course. I love that you did have tremendous different slopes in between, like little plateaus in each green. So it almost seems like there's 3 greens in one, and there's different things going on in between them to kind of separate them. And if you're have a pin position on, let's say, back right, and you hit the ball on back left, you're really going to have to compromise a crazy slope in between, or what some people would say is a crazy slope. I don't believe it's a crazy slope. I think that it's visionary, and that it really has a tremendous amount of character, and it also is a risk-reward type thing where it'll reward the better players if they're on a certain section of the green. If they're not, then they're kind of going to get punished. So if they're playing well, they're going to really play well. If they're playing not so well, then they really have to be, really start to play well if they want to shoot well on those type of greens.
Well, I think the thing that Letter Rock has done really well, and the superintendent there, Stu Hartman, has understood from the very beginning, is that the what we call the stemp reading, how quick the greens are going to be. They've really kept them under control. And of course they've been kind of forced to do that because of the design of those greens, but that was the whole intent from the beginning. I mean, we knew that the greens were going to be challenging, that there are some good slopes throughout some of the pin areas and in between the pin areas. So we always expected that that they really need to be maintained at a reasonable stemp. And I don't want to speak to what he may be doing there, but he does have them at a reasonable speed, and therefore those pin areas work. We've had similar green designs at a private club out on Long Island, where a lot of times I think between the clubs there's some contest going on or kind of ego as to who has the fastest greens. And we've got some greens out there very similar to Letter Rock, I think, in the approach, the style, the design, yet the stemp reading is way up. Supposedly they enjoy it. And I guess they've kind of conditioned themselves to enjoy it. I don't find it as enjoyable at the higher rates. I really like what they do at Letter Rock and the green speed that they have there. I think it's more reasonable, and I think it's more fun. And I think there's some challenge. I enjoy putting on greens that have those different kinds of slopes and have those undulations and interest in the design, but at a slower speed than I do playing flat greens at a very high speed. So I think that green speed has a lot to do with working with the design, and if the two of them work well together, then I think you can have some very good greens and very interesting play.
Now, does slope come into play a lot when you're talking about drainage, or is it overall a combination of slope and the way that you actually build the green from the base up to the green itself? In other words, how the water filters through the turf and down under.
All the construction that I've done has been USGA green. Really, I've never had a sandy site where we could just build the greens onto the existing soil and not have to worry about drainage. So the USGA or some version of the USGA green, has always been a part of the construction, and obviously that helps in the internal design. But you still do need surface drainage. So you do, generally I think we try to keep a minimum of 1% anywhere on the green, sloping in some direction. And then, the nice thing about the type of green design that I've been doing is that the greens do break in many different directions. So you don't have all the water coming off the front, which can be a problem on some golf courses you see where the greens generally just slope high from a high elevation in the back to a low elevation in the front. So all the water comes off the front. And during, wet periods, the area in front of the greens are always wet. So you can't bounce the ball into the greens because it's always sticking and plugging. So with the kind of green design that we're doing, we have a lot of different slopes breaking in different directions, coming toward the front. We do have quite a few pin areas. For instance, number 12 green at Letter Rock, where most of the green actually goes away from you. You don't find that too often. But I think that's an interesting design. You saw that a little bit at St. Andrews and some of those pin areas they had where they talked about that, where they actually had to kind of carry a plateau, and then because of the wet conditions, I guess they could stop it on those pin areas, but they talked a lot about the pin areas sloping away from the incoming shot. So they wanted to be beyond the pin, get the ball beyond the pin, so they're putting uphill. We've got that on quite a few greens at Letter Rock. But again, you're taking water off in a different direction, to the back, to the left, to the right, to the front. And that certainly, I think, helps in the overall design of the green and helps kind of keep the green dry, but also the surrounding areas dry, because you're not concentrating water in any one particular area.
Sure. So, and of course, too, doesn't any natural water source that's running through the golf course itself have a influence on that too? In other words, if you have a creek running through there, or you have or where you put ponds, or if there's natural water on the course, then is the tendency to more slope towards that area?
Yeah, I mean, you can surface drain water toward those, absolutely. But again, with the internal drainage, the way that the greens are constructed, that green can really move any direction, irregardless of where the creek might be. And then you can capture that with subsurface drainage and eventually route that toward the creek. We're a lot of times like to be careful about any type of water we're taking toward a creek and have some sort of buffer, like a natural turf buffer before the water actually gets into the water body of the creek, so that if there are any contaminants or whatever, it can get kind of cleansed through the turf. But for the most part, the land will be sloping toward a water body like that. Like you said, particularly a natural creek, more than likely, the land is kind of a valley that's sloping toward that creek. And depending on where you put the green, if the green's going to look like it fits in well, doesn't necessarily need to, be natural, as everyone says. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with man-made features and it looking man-made to some extent. But, for the most part, if it's going to work well and eventually tie in well with the surrounding terrain, then it probably is going to mimic that slope toward the creek.
So then, essentially, players who because there's most players have I don't want to say it's a saying, but most players believe that if they're on a green and they see water, that the ball's always going to break towards the water. And that's, I don't know whether, in this case, and what I'm trying to get down to is that a wives' tale? Is there sometimes that you're going to have the break on the green or the slope on the green actually slope away from the water, even though it is draining internally to the water eventually? So that's a question that I'm trying to get at with this, is because there's so many players that in their mind they have these preconceived notions that this is the way it always is. And what I'm trying to find out here, speaking with someone who does this and builds it for a living, that is that so or is that not so?
I definitely think it's not so. I don't think that's something you can just rely on, and that may, if you're not quite sure, if it is flat enough to where you're having a tough time getting a read on it, probably that would be a good choice to make, is to assume that it probably is draining toward the creek or lake that's next to the green. If you're not getting a good read on it. But I think if you're seeing it doing something differently, but in the back of your mind, maybe that old wives' tale that everything, is going to be designed and drained toward the creek or toward the pond. If you're just not seeing that, then I would definitely go with your intuition, because I think on a good green design, it could be breaking in any different direction. It's not always going to be breaking toward the creek. I always remember in one of Jack Nicklaus's, I'm not sure which book that was, but he always talked about trying to envision just a big bucket of water being dropped on the green and then kind of look for where that water may be breaking. And certainly, if you got bunkers around a green, you're probably going to see water draining away from the bunker. So if you're anywhere near a bunker, then the slopes from that coming off that bunker into the green should be directing water away from the bunker. So you can probably get a pretty good read that if you're near the bunker, that any kind of slope coming off of that bunker is going to be breaking away from the bunker. You can, I always look around the green, look for low points, because even though the green may be constructed with subsurface drainage, you're still looking to take water off of the green from the surface off the green. So I always look around the green when I'm having a tough time reading and look for those, what I think may be the low points around the green where they were, where they designed to take water off the green when I'm trying to get a good read on it as well.
Do you find that older architecture, because I mean, since you are an architect, I'm sure that you've studied many other architects and maybe classic designers, like Ross and Tillinghast and to name a few, they're the ones that just come to my brain right now. But did you find that that old wives' tale held more true in their type of work, or do you think that their work was similar to what you're doing too, is where they didn't always have everything, that it was just an old wives' tale, and that it makes me wonder why people ever came up with that old wives' tale that everything always breaks towards the water or breaks towards the setting sun.
Some of that may have been with grain as well. I'm not sure when there were more grain in the greens, and that any kind of surface water would have influenced the grain more, so the break would be influenced by that. But I can't really say that that I've studied the Ross or the Tillinghast enough to be able to say that definitively that they designed their greens for the most part to take advantage of that creek or stream and drain the and drain the green toward that. I couldn't say. I think they would probably, back in that time when they did not have USGA green, did not have subsurface drainage, might have been a little bit more sensitive to surface flow, and might have been a little bit more responsive to any low areas such as creeks or water bodies near the greens. Their design might have been more responsive to that, to get the surface water off the green toward that creek as quickly as possible. So my guess would be that they probably were a little bit more. I think on their golf courses, you might find that the greens probably do break toward the water bodies a little bit more than what you might find on today's green design. But that's purely speculation.
Well, it would make sense. I mean, they didn't have as much technology at that point, or I guess regulations at that point either. So they probably went with what they felt worked the best, and that could have been a good reason why. They always said, balls are going to break towards a body of water. And that's probably where they came up with it. But now that things are a little bit different, that's not always so. So it's better to just kind of look at the slope and then understand that. And I know that for me, I like to feel it with my feet when I'm reading greens. And I like to try to find the fall line. Where you got that straight uphill putt, and then build everything around that fall line, and it seems to work pretty well.
I think it's always helpful to go around a green, kind of look at its surroundings, and then again try to find the low points around that green. Sometimes it's easier to read a green overall just by trying to find the low points, and then kind of kneeling down and looking at it from the low points. It's a little easier to see the subtle breaks as opposed to maybe being up on a bit of a hill on the green and trying to look down on things. I think things are a little bit more flattened out from the higher elevation on a green. I think it's easier to find the low points on a green, kind of be down low, and I think you get a better read of what the putting surface is doing. You kind of you know how when you're in a bunker and you're kind of just looking over that bunker edge at the green, it seems like you get a better read on what's happening on the green from those lower areas.
Yeah, well, your eye line is almost level with the surface then,
right.
And so now you can kind of better see what that surface is doing, as opposed to when you're standing well above the surface. And if you're 5'10" or 6 foot or however tall you are, you're that much higher above it, so you're getting a little bit of skewed look at what's really going on. That's why I kind of use my feet a lot, too, if I don't have that opportunity. Some greens aren't built up as high either. You really can't get down to eye level unless you're, doing like, what's that guy's name? Emilio, who lays down on the green there.
Right.
Does his Spider-Man thing.
Right. And I think your method is good because, on these greens where you have breaks going in different directions, you do get a lot of internal contour. Ridges, bumps, that are in the middle of the green, or with not on the periphery, but in the middle of the green. So you get a lot of these internal contours and breaks that are not always easy to see when you have a green that's sloping left to right, maybe from the middle. We'll just say from the middle portion of the green to the right side, it's sloping down at 3%. And then maybe from that point to the left, it's sloping at 2%. Well, you could have the back of the green actually sloping away from you at 1%, and it would be hard to perceive that. You might just see a green that looks like, okay, it's breaking to the left, it's breaking to the right, and with that 1% breaking away from you toward the back of the green, you may never see that. Might be easier to pick up with your method, like you said, walking the green and kind of trying to feel it with your feet. But until you hit that putt and all of a sudden Not only is it, if you're hitting to the left side, is it moving toward the left side of the green, but it's actually moving toward the back of the green. You're like, wait a minute, I always thought greens were built to be high in the back and low in the front, and yet my ball's breaking away toward the back, but it's very hard to see. So when you have those areas where different slopes meet, 3% meets 1%, or 2% meets 4%, or 1% meets 4%, those little breaks in the green are not always easy to pick up on, and that's probably where some of the confusion comes in, and you can kind of manipulate certain pin areas and make them a little bit more challenging because it's harder for people to realize that there's been a change in the surface. And then sometimes you may take those breaks and actually pronounce them, into a big bold ridge or some sort of hillock going through the green where those slopes, different slopes come together and meet. You may actually pronounce that and show it. But other times you may not. You may just blend it so that they don't really perceive that there's been a change.
Do you find that, I know that as you mentioned earlier in the show, that Letter Rock is one of your favorites in when it comes to greens, and that drastic, or I want to say not really drastic, because some people will say drastic. The more I've played it, the less I feel it's drastic. But like a bold ridge going through, is that what you prefer to do in your design, or was that just what was lent to that golf course?
No, I think it's always fun to work with those kinds of shapes and greens. Absolutely, I think that. Like you said, the more experience that you have with something like that, the less intimidating it is, and the more you realize how to play it. But initially, it can be unnerving, and it can be something that almost looks too difficult to overcome. And I think that it does kind of get that negative reaction. I can't tell you how many people, people who don't even know that I've designed the course, but I've heard them say that they hated the course the first time they played it probably because of things like that. The greens are too bold, too much slope and all that. But then they'll say, you know what, but the more I played it, the more I began to understand it, the more I began to realize how to play it with my game, and now I love it. And part of that too is there's some hidden bunkers, kind of the same concepts in the fairways. There's slopes in the fairways that kind of take your ball one way or the other. There's hidden bunkers. And I think that it takes a while to kind of figure out where to play the shot. And I think the greens are probably what take the longest to understand. And when you have those bold hills or ridges through the greens, I think there definitely is a reaction to that. Visually, they see it, and there is a reaction to that. It's not subtle. It's bold. It's kind of in your face. It's intimidating, but once you play it a few times, you kind of realize, how to take it out of play. Maybe, aim to the right part of the green so that you take it out of play. Or if you do face that because you haven't hit the right kind of shot and you do have to putt it, it's, with a little bit of practice, it's not quite so intimidating.
Yeah, my reaction was exactly the opposite when I first played there. I went, I love this place. This is awesome. I love the greens. I love everything about the whole layout. And as I played it more, I loved it even more. And then as I discovered how it did what it did and started to understand what you were kind of trying to make happen there, I loved it even more. I think that it's a brilliant layout. I think that that when you first see it, it's dramatic, and that's what to me drew me to it, is that the drama of the whole layout. And I also know that once you play it for a while, you have certain spots, and if you understand where to hit it, you're going to be rewarded, and you can really shoot really low scores there if you know where to hit the ball. If you don't know where to hit the ball, you can add 20 shots to your score that day. So I think that, as you said, at first some people get upset about that, and it's because they don't know where to hit it. If they continue to play it, then they can say it kind of grows on them. For me, it grew on me from day one, and I still believe that as a public layout in the Philadelphia area, it's the finest one out there. There's only one other course that I believe will hold candle to it, and we don't even need to mention them. But I've always been a huge fan.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's fantastic layout. So we're kind of winding down here on the on our clock, unfortunately. So what you mentioned before we go that your latest project is a range now?
Yes, the driving range is a part of an overall master plan we have for an 18-hole golf course in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And but right now, the phase one is to construct the driving range, and that's we're doing a double deck driving range there, and we've got some nice target greens out there. We're pretty much covering every distance from about 90 yards all the way up to about 210 in the way we position the target greens. But one thing that we've done that I've always felt like would be an interesting aspect of it is it's not one of these big wide driving ranges, where maybe you have target flags out there or signs. It narrows and it's more like a fairway. Now the target greens are set up on the edges, but as you move down the range, it's going to look more like a fairway, so that when you're practicing your driver, you do feel like that you're hitting to a golf hole, not just some big broad field, but you're actually hitting to a golf hole. And then we'll have some target bunkers out there, so you can kind of judge how well you're hitting the tee shot, not only in terms of distance, but in terms of accuracy or position. And I think that's important. I think, most of the driving ranges I see are just big, broad, wide driving ranges. Yeah. And that's easy. An old book that I read, a guy named Percy Boomer, who was a golf instructor, yep, talked about how easy it is to play to those big, broad, open areas, because your swing is more free. It's not confined by your fears of either water on one side or bunkers on both sides or rough or whatever. So your mind is kind of freed from that fear that you have on the tee shot. But that can be a good thing. That can work into your design strategy on a hole, because they may feel that they can just swing freely, and they can have a big wide fairway. But once they get up there, they'll find that they're not in the right position to enter the green. But I think when you're practicing, it's kind of nice to know how accurate you are, and nice to be able to work on, your left to right shot or your right to left shot for those types of players that have that ability to kind of work the ball. I think that's a good thing to work on, and just to kind of ingrain that feeling of having to perform that tee shot, having to hit it into a certain area, which is a little bit more realistic for when you then take your game out onto a golf course.
Have you ever added slope to your ranges too? In other words, in the hitting area, instead of it being fairly level, have you ever had any areas of the range that's like uneven lies for players to hit off of, or have you never really gotten into that?
Haven't done that yet, and I'm sure it has been done. I think I've heard talk about that. I can't remember now which clubs have maybe done something like that, and but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how important that is. I mean, as a teacher, you probably would like to have that to be able to maybe take a player to the next level and help them work on slopes. I know a lot of the controversy we have on practice putting greens is sometimes people will build a lot of slope into the greens. Say like for instance at a letter rock, say, well, we should build our practice putting green exactly like the greens out on the course. And I'm not sure that always works well, because what I've heard, particularly from better players, is they're not so much wanting to simulate what's out on the golf course. They're just wanting to work on their stroke, on their tempo, on their rhythm, and do that on a relatively flat green, as opposed to having these big breaks and big land features that they have to overcome, where it's harder to just work on your stroke. So I know some clubs, like the Hideout down in Naples, of course, that we did there, they have some very good golfers. I think at one time the average handicap was like 8 at the golf club. They wanted a flat green, because I think the better players just wanted to work on their stroke. They didn't want to be having to overcome big slopes and features on the green. So I'm not sure if that holds true on the practice tee, as well. If you're really kind of just wanting to work on the basic and not get so much into all these different undulating lies that you might have, out on the golf course. So I mean, that'd be a question back to you, I guess, as a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I would like to see some of that just so that students have the opportunity to work on some of those things and practice some of those things. Not maybe before a round of golf, but on a day that they're not going to go play, maybe be able to, because they can't get out on the golf course, they might not have enough time. And I think that once they're out on the golf course, they're not facing a lot of level lies. So, but they're warming up and practicing on level lies the whole time. And then when they get out there, it kind of changes it. So I as an instructor, would prefer seeing an area like maybe a third of the driving range be devoted to uphill, downhill, side hill type lies that players can hit full shots into pins or into target greens or whatever, full irons and maybe hybrids, things like that. So, and I'm not talking about drastic, I'm talking about what they're going to encounter overall on the golf course. And then that way, they can practice that on their day off in between, and see that, oh my gosh, if I hit the ball and it's above my feet, it's going left. So a lot of people don't even realize that until they get out on the golf course, and then it's too late because now they made a poor shot and they have to try to recover from it.
I think for some of us who have kind of grown up in the game, we read a lot about it. So you kind of read about how you should handle the ball above your feet, below your feet. Your left foot higher than your right foot higher than your left foot, maybe adjusting your shoulders accordingly. I know just working with my kids, that's some stuff they never even heard of. If the left foot's below the right foot, then I've always taught them to kind of adjust their shoulders to be a little bit more parallel to the slope. And if you're not a real student of the game, you don't really hear that kind of thing. But for you to be able to go out on the driving range tee and actually show them, take them to that sloping ground and say, okay, here's what I mean. Here's what it should feel like. Now try it. I can see where that could be very helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that overall it will help players better understand, and when they do, then they know what to do when they encounter on the golf course, which means they're going to shoot better scores, which means they're going to want to play more, because everybody wants to do more of what they do well. They don't want to do more of what they don't do well. Because they feel like they're being punished and frustrated. They'd rather feel like they're being rewarded for the work that they put in. But if they never have the opportunity to practice those things, with hit 10, 15 shots off a certain lie and start to get the feel of it, they don't have the time to do that out on the golf course usually, because there's somebody else coming up behind them. They can't continue to drop balls and hit them out there. That happens sometimes. I mean, late, right before dusk, I used to go out on the golf course when there's nobody out there and throw balls on uneven lies and hit balls into pins and see what they're doing and how it's reacting and things like that. But a lot of times players don't have that opportunity. So if it were something like that on the range, then maybe that could be something that maybe more architects should look into and think about.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I mean, every little bit helps. And like you said, I think if you can make a player feel more comfortable when they're out on the golf course and then accomplish something like that when they do encounter a slope and actually, hit a half decent shot and perform something that they never had been able to do before, obviously that's going to help them appreciate the game more. And Bernard, I just think golf naturally is attractive to people. I think once people kind of get the bug, they realize just what a wonderful sport it is. And there is a lot of negativity in the game today, and because of the economy and supposedly because of how much time it takes and all that. But I think golf naturally is attractive, and I think people, once they kind of get into it and then get good instruction from people like yourselves and begin to learn more of that, I mean, they're hooked and they realize what a great game it is. So every little bit like that helps.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's the greatest game that there is, and it really builds character or it turns you into one.
All right, that's the truth.
So it's great having you with us.
The older I get, the more I realize, people used to say, golf is like life. And that was just one of those things that really, when you're younger, didn't make much sense. But as I get older, it really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really like life. There's disappointment. Around the golf on 18 holes, there's a lot of disappointment that comes along the way, just like life. But you learn to battle through it. And you may not shoot that score you want to shoot that day, but if you just keep showing up and battling hard, you're going to be proud of yourself at the end of the round. It may not be, maybe you don't shoot that 80 that you were hoping to shoot, but you shoot 86, but you realize that 86 could have been a 92, but you showed some character, you battled through it, and that's life.
Yep, that's just the way life is. And like you just said, well, you got to show up and you got to do your part. And if you do, eventually, and don't walk away, you're going to achieve the goals that you want, that you've laid before yourself. And that also builds character. And that's another thing that I like about the game, is that it helps people. They do the right thing on the golf course. A lot of times they're going to do the right thing on out there in life too. And we can see that if we go to play around the golf with somebody.
Right.
Kind of how they conduct their life, it shows up on the golf course right away, at least what I've seen. So it was wonderful having you here. I really appreciate you taking the time. There's a lot of instructors and people who are involved in the game of golf as a profession who listen to our show. And if any of those people would be interested in working with you, having you come to their track and maybe do some revamping or do something new, how would they get in touch with you?
Probably a couple of ways. I mean, you can always get me through email. The name of my company is Kelly Blake Moran Golf Course Architects. So the email is the acronym of that, KBMGCA@iCloud.com. I do have a website, kellyblakemoran.com. You can get me through there, and then you can always feel free to give me a call on the cell phone as well. If I don't know if you want to give numbers like that out on here, but
that's totally up to you. I've had guys give their phone numbers out, and that's up to them. So no, I'm sure that we can put your your website information up there, and they can get in touch with you that way.
Absolutely.
All right, great, Kelly. Thanks so much. And as we always like to say here in parting, try to keep it in the short grass.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Enjoyed it.
All right, take care.